Hi, I'm Bianca. I'm 23 years old, and I live in a small apartment in Portland, Oregon, where the rain seems to understand my mood better than most people do. I work as a barista at a local coffee shop called Grind and Shine, and I've been dating Marcus for 2 years now. Most people would say I have a pretty normal life, but normal has a way of changing in an instant, especially when family dinners are involved. My relationship with my mom, Patricia, has always been complicated. She's the kind of woman who measures success by traditional milestones: marriage, house, kids, career advancement. She works as a real estate agent in the suburban neighborhood where I grew up, and she's incredibly good at reading people's desires and selling them the perfect dream. The problem is, she applies those same skills to her own daughter's life. Marcus is everything my mom thinks I should want. He's 26, works in tech, drives a reliable Honda Civic, and has a 5-year plan that includes homeownership and a 401k. He's kind, stable, and genuinely loves me. But lately I've been feeling like I'm suffocating in all that stability. There's this restlessness inside me that I can't quite name, like I'm living someone else's version of happiness. Portland's autumn was particularly beautiful this year. The maple trees lining my street had turned brilliant shades of orange and red, and the crisp air carried the scent of wood smoke from neighborhood fireplaces. I was walking home from work, my apron still damp from the afternoon rush, when my phone buzzed with a text from Mom. Dinner Sunday, 6 p.m. Bring Marcus. Making pot roast. I stopped walking and stared at the message. These family dinners had become a monthly ritual, and they always followed the same script. Mom would ask Marcus about his work, praise his ambition, and then make subtle comments about how settled we seemed together. Dad would nod along, more interested in the football game playing on the living room TV than our conversation. And I would sit there, smiling and nodding, feeling like a supporting character in my own life. The coffee shop was busy that Friday afternoon, filled with the usual mix of college students, remote workers, and people seeking refuge from the drizzle outside. I was pulling shots of espresso when my coworker Jamie noticed my distracted expression. "You okay, B?" Jamie asked, wiping down the counter. "You look like you're somewhere else." "Just thinking about this family dinner on Sunday," I replied, steaming milk for a latte. "You know how my mom gets." Jamie laughed knowingly. "The one who thinks Marcus is the second coming of the perfect son-in-law? That's the one." I handed the drink to the waiting customer and turned back to Jamie. "Sometimes I feel like she loves him more than she loves me." "That's ridiculous," Jamie said, but their expression softened. "Your mom just wants what she thinks is best for you. But what if what she thinks is best isn't actually best for me?" The question hung in the air between us, heavy with implications I wasn't ready to fully explore. That evening, I met Marcus at our favorite Thai restaurant. He was already seated when I arrived, scrolling through his phone with that focused expression he got when reading work emails. Even during our date night, he couldn't fully disconnect from the demands of his software development job. "Hey," I said, sliding into the booth across from him. "Sorry I'm late. The afternoon rush was insane." "No worries," he replied, putting his phone away and giving me his full attention. "How was your day?" We fell into our usual rhythm of conversation. Work, weekend plans, the new series we were watching together. Marcus was attentive and caring, asking follow-up questions, and remembering details from previous conversations. He was genuinely interested in my life, which made my growing feelings of discontent even more confusing. "My mom wants us to come to dinner on Sunday," I mentioned while we waited for our food. "Sounds good. I like your parents," Marcus smiled, and I could see he meant it. "Your mom always makes me feel so welcome." "Yeah, she really likes you," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. "I hope so. I've been thinking." Marcus reached across the table and took my hand. "I know it's early, but I've been saving up, and I thought maybe next year we could start looking at places together. Nothing fancy, just a starter home." My heart started racing, but not in the way it should have. Instead of excitement, I felt a familiar sense of panic, like walls were closing in around me. That's a big step," I managed to say. "I know, but we've been together for 2 years. And I love you, Bianca. I want to build a life with you." The sincerity in his voice made my chest tighten. Here was this wonderful man offering me everything I was supposed to want, and all I could think about was escape routes. "I love you too," I said, because it was true, even if it felt complicated. As we walked back to my apartment after dinner, the Portland streets glistened with fresh rain. The city lights reflected off the wet pavement, creating a kaleidoscope of colors that usually made me feel peaceful. But tonight, everything felt overwhelming. "Are you excited about Sunday?" Marcus asked as we reached my building. "Sure," I lied, forcing a smile. "It'll be nice." But as I watched him drive away, I couldn't shake the feeling that Sunday's dinner was going to change everything. There was something in the air, a tension I couldn't quite name, like the moment before a storm breaks. I stood there in the drizzle, looking up at my apartment window, and wondered if I was brave enough to face whatever was coming. Sunday arrived with the kind of overcast sky that made Portland feel like it was wrapped in a gray blanket. I spent the morning at the coffee shop, working a short shift that did nothing to calm my nerves. Every customer interaction felt mechanical, like I was going through the motions while my mind raced with anxiety about the evening ahead. My childhood home sat in a quiet suburb about 20 minutes from downtown Portland. The house was a modest 2-story with a well-maintained front yard, and the kind of flower beds that screamed middle-class stability. Mom had always taken pride in the appearance of our home, seeing it as a reflection of our family's success and respectability. Marcus picked me up at 5:30, arriving precisely on time as always. He wore a button-down shirt and khakis, what I'd started thinking of as his meeting the parents uniform. As we drove through the familiar neighborhoods of my youth, he chattered about work and made observations about the changing seasons. I nodded along, but my attention kept drifting to the window, watching houses blur past like scenes from a life I was no longer sure I wanted. "You're quiet today," Marcus observed as we pulled into my parents' driveway. "Everything okay?" "Just tired," I said, which wasn't entirely a lie. The emotional exhaustion of pretending to be content with my life was wearing me down. Mom greeted us at the door with her real estate agent smile. Perfectly practiced and genuinely warm. She hugged Marcus first, which didn't go unnoticed, then turned to me with the kind of critical once-over that mothers specialize in. "You look thin, honey. Are you eating enough?" "I'm fine, Mom," I replied, already feeling the familiar tension creep into my shoulders. Dad emerged from the living room, beer in hand, and gave Marcus a firm handshake. "Good to see you, son. How's the tech world treating you?" As they launched into their usual conversation about market trends and startup culture, I escaped to the kitchen where Mom was putting the finishing touches on dinner. The smell of pot roast filled the air, triggering a flood of childhood memories. Sunday dinners, family gatherings, the comfort of routine and tradition. "Need any help?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Just set the table, sweetheart. The good china is already out." I noticed she'd used the special dishes reserved for important occasions, and I wondered if this dinner was more significant than I'd realized. Mom had a way of telegraphing her intentions through domestic details. The choice of plates, the selection of wine, the particular arrangement of flowers on the table. During dinner, the conversation flowed predictably. Mom asked Marcus about his latest project, a mobile app designed to help small businesses manage their inventory. She listened with the kind of focused attention she usually reserved for high-end real estate clients, asking thoughtful questions and making encouraging noises at all the right moments. "That sounds incredibly innovative," she said, refilling his wine glass. "You're really building something meaningful." Dad chimed in with questions about the financial aspects of the business, and I watched Marcus light up as he discussed his 5-year projections and potential for expansion. He was in his element, confident and articulate, painting a picture of a future filled with professional success and financial security. "What about you, Bianca?" Mom asked, turning to me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Any exciting developments at the coffee shop?" The question stung more than it should have. I knew she didn't mean to be dismissive, but her tone carried the weight of disappointment she'd been carrying since I'd graduated college with an art degree and chosen to work in food service instead of pursuing a real career. "Actually, I've been thinking about taking some photography classes," I said, surprised by my own honesty. "There's this program at the community college that focuses on documentary photography." The silence that followed was deafening. Mom's fork paused halfway to her mouth, and Dad looked up from his plate with a confused expression. Marcus, bless him, tried to be supportive. "That sounds interesting," he said. "You've always had a good eye for composition. Photography is a nice hobby," Mom said carefully, "but it's not exactly a stable career path." I'm not talking about it as a career, I replied, though even as I said it, I wasn't sure it was true. I just want to learn something new, explore a different creative outlet. At your age, shouldn't you be thinking about more practical things? Mom's voice had taken on the tone she used when she was trying to guide a client away from a house they couldn't afford. You and Marcus have been together for 2 years. Don't you think it's time to start planning for the future? I felt Marcus shift uncomfortably beside me. We'd had this conversation before, but never in front of my parents. We've actually been talking about that, he said, clearly trying to help. Have you? Mom's face brightened with interest. Tell me more. Well, I've been saving for a down payment on a house, Marcus continued, glancing at me for support. I was thinking maybe next year we could start looking at places together. That's wonderful. Mom clapped her hands together. Patricia, this is exactly what I was hoping to hear. A house is such an important foundation for a relationship. I watched this exchange with growing irritation. Here they were, discussing my life as if I weren't sitting right there, making plans and assumptions about my future without bothering to ask what I actually wanted. I haven't said yes to anything yet, I interjected, my voice sharper than I intended. The table fell silent again. Mom's smile faltered, and Marcus looked at me with confusion and hurt. Dad continued eating, pretending not to notice the tension that had suddenly filled the room. Of course not, sweetheart, Mom said, her voice taking on a patronizing tone. But Marcus is offering you something wonderful. He's stable, he has a good job, he clearly loves you. What more could you want? Maybe I want to figure out what I want before I commit to a mortgage, I said, my frustration finally bubbling over. Maybe I want to explore my own interests and see what else is out there. But Bianca, Mom said, her voice gentle but firm, you can't just drift through life forever. You need to think about your future, about security, about building something meaningful. And photography isn't meaningful. It's not practical, she replied. Look, I know you're creative, and that's wonderful, but creativity doesn't pay bills or provide health insurance. Marcus is offering you a real life, a stable foundation. Don't you see how lucky you are? I looked around the table at these 3 people who claimed to love me. All of them united in their certainty about what was best for my life. The weight of their expectations felt crushing, and I could feel my composure beginning to crack. I need some air, I said, standing abruptly and heading for the back door. The evening air was cool against my flushed cheeks as I stood on the deck, looking out at the small backyard where I'd played as a child. The swing set was still there, though it had been years since anyone had used it. I remembered spending hours on those swings, dreaming about the adventures I'd have when I grew up, the places I'd see, the person I'd become. None of those dreams had included settling down at 23 with a mortgage and a 5-year plan. Marcus found me there a few minutes later, his expression concerned and slightly hurt. Hey, he said softly. What's going on? I'm sorry, I said, turning to face him. I didn't mean to make things awkward in there. It's okay. I thought we were on the same page about the future. We are, or we were. I don't know. I sank into one of the deck chairs, feeling suddenly exhausted. Do you ever feel like you're living someone else's life? Marcus sat down beside me, reaching for my hand. Sometimes. But isn't that what compromise is? Finding a balance between what you want and what's practical? But what if what's practical isn't what makes you happy? Then you find a way to make it work, he said simply. You find happiness in the life you build together. I wanted to believe him, but something deep inside me was screaming that settling for making it work wasn't enough. I deserved more than a life of compromise and practical decisions. I deserved to find out who I really was and what I really wanted. As we sat there in silence, I realized that the conversation at dinner hadn't been about Marcus's house plans or my photography classes. It had been about something much deeper, the fundamental question of whether I was brave enough to disappoint the people I loved in order to be true to myself. The drive home from my parents' house was filled with a tense silence that seemed to press against the windows of Marcus's car. The familiar streets of Portland blurred past in the darkness, streetlights creating pools of yellow light that we passed through like stages in a play I no longer wanted to perform in. Marcus finally broke the silence as we stopped at a red light. I feel like I'm missing something here, he said, his voice careful and measured. I thought you'd be happy about the house idea. I am happy, I said automatically, then immediately regretted the lie. I mean, I appreciate that you want to plan a future with me. It's just what? The light turned green, and we continued driving through the quiet Sunday evening streets. I watched a couple walking their dog, bundled up in matching scarves, and wondered if they were content with their simple domestic life, or if they too harbored secret dreams of escape. I feel like everyone has my life figured out except me, I said finally. My mom, you, even my dad with his nodding in approval. You all seem so certain about what's best for me. Because we love you, Marcus said, pulling into my apartment complex. And from the outside, it's easier to see what could make you happy. But what if you're wrong? We sat in the parked car for a moment, the engine ticking as it cooled. Through my apartment window, I could see the soft glow of the lamp I'd left on, the stack of books on my coffee table, the camera I'd bought 6 months ago, but barely used. My life was contained in that small space, and suddenly, it felt both too small and too big at the same time. Bianca, Marcus said, turning to face me, I need you to be honest with me. Are you having doubts about us? The question hung in the air between us like a challenge. I could see the vulnerability in his eyes, the way his hands gripped the steering wheel a little too tightly. This was the moment where I could either tell him the truth or continue the pretense that everything was fine. I'm having doubts about everything, I admitted. My job, my life, where I'm headed. It's not personal. But it affects us, he said quietly. If you don't know what you want, how can we plan a future together? I didn't have an answer for that. Instead, I leaned over and kissed him goodbye, tasting the wine from dinner on his lips. I need some time to think, I said. How much time? I don't know. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the rain that had started falling again. Portland's rain was different from the dramatic storms I'd experienced in other places. It was gentle, persistent, like a conversation that never quite ended. I thought about the expression on my mother's face when I'd mentioned photography classes, the way her smile had faltered just slightly before she'd launched into her lecture about practicality. I couldn't sleep, so I got up and made tea, settling into my reading chair with my laptop. On impulse, I Googled documentary photography programs Portland and found myself scrolling through course descriptions, faculty bios, and student portfolios. The work was beautiful and meaningful. Photographers capturing stories of homelessness, environmental change, immigrant experiences, social justice movements. These were people using their art to make a difference, to shine light on important issues. By morning, I had filled out an application for the spring semester program. The next few days passed in a blur of routine punctuated by moments of anxiety. I worked my shifts at the coffee shop, had dinner with Marcus, went through the motions of my regular life while internally wrestling with questions I couldn't answer. Jamie noticed my distraction and finally cornered me during a quiet afternoon shift. Okay, what's going on? They demanded, blocking my path to the espresso machine. You've been weird all week. I applied for photography school, I blurted out, surprising myself with the admission. Jamie's eyes widened. That's amazing. When do you start? I don't know if I'm going to go, I said quickly. I just applied. I haven't even told Marcus yet. Why not? Because he's planning to buy a house, and my mom thinks I should be focusing on practical things, and everyone seems to have opinions about what I should do with my life, except me. Jamie set down the cleaning rag they'd been holding and looked at me seriously. B, can I ask you something? When you imagine yourself in 5 years, what do you see? I opened my mouth to give the expected answer. Marriage, house, maybe kids, a stable life in Portland, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I found myself thinking about the photography portfolios I'd looked at, the stories waiting to be told, the feeling of creating something meaningful with my own hands. I see myself traveling, I said slowly, taking pictures, documenting stories that matter. I see myself feeling passionate about my work, instead of just going through the motions. Then why are you not doing that? Because it's not practical. Because it's selfish. Because it might mean hurting people I care about. Jamie leaned against the counter, studying my face. You know what's really selfish? Staying in a life that makes you miserable just to avoid making other people uncomfortable. Their words hit me like a physical blow. I'd been so focused on being considerate, on not disappointing anyone, that I'd forgotten to consider what I owed to myself. That evening, I decided to have an honest conversation with Marcus. We met at a small restaurant in the Pearl District, the kind of place with exposed brick walls and craft cocktails that we'd discovered together during happier times. I watched him study the menu, his brow furrowed in concentration, and felt a pang of affection mixed with sadness. "I have something to tell you," I said after we'd ordered. "Okay," he said, setting down his menu and giving me his full attention. "I applied for a photography program. It's a 6-month intensive course in documentary photography." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. "When would it start?" "January, if I get in." "And if you get in, you'd want to do it?" "I think so. Yes." "What about the house? What about our plans?" I took a deep breath, knowing that my next words would change everything between us. "I think we need to put those plans on hold. I need to figure out who I am and what I want before I can commit to a life with someone else." Marcus stared at me, his expression cycling through confusion, hurt, and finally, a kind of resigned understanding. "You're breaking up with me." "I'm asking for space," I said, tears beginning to form in my eyes. "I need time to explore this other part of myself, to see if I can make something of it. And if you can't, if it doesn't work out, then at least I'll know I tried." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of 2 years of shared dreams and future plans crumbling between us. Marcus reached across the table and took my hand, and I could see that he was trying not to cry. "I love you," he said. "I want you to be happy, even if it's not with me." "I love you too," I replied, and meant it. "That's why I have to do this." We didn't eat much of our dinner. Instead, we talked about practical things: the keys to each other's apartments, the houseplant he'd given me, the book of his I'd been meaning to return, the mundane details of untangling a shared life. As we walked back to his car, Marcus stopped suddenly and turned to me. "Your mom is going to be furious. I know. She'll blame me for not fighting harder to keep you. She'll blame me for being selfish and impractical. Are you ready for that?" I thought about my mother's face at dinner, her certainty about what was best for me, her inability to see that her support felt more like a cage than a foundation. I'm ready to find out who I am when I'm not trying to be what everyone else thinks I should be. Marcus kissed me goodbye in the parking lot, a soft, sad kiss that tasted like endings and new beginnings. As I watched him drive away, I felt a mixture of grief and relief that left me breathless. I'd just ended the most stable relationship I'd ever had, and I had no idea what came next. But for the first time in months, I felt like I was moving toward something instead of away from it. The call came on a Tuesday morning in December, just as I was preparing for what I knew would be the most difficult conversation of my life. The photography program had accepted me, and classes would begin in January. I stared at the acceptance email on my phone screen, reading the words over and over until they sank in. "We are pleased to inform you that you have been selected for our documentary photography intensive program." I was holding my future in my hands, and I'd never been more terrified. The conversation with my parents couldn't be delayed any longer. I'd spent the past month since my breakup with Marcus living in a strange limbo, working at the coffee shop, while quietly preparing for a life change that nobody else knew about. I'd saved money, researched equipment, and even started carrying my camera with me around Portland, practicing the art of seeing stories in everyday moments. I called Mom on my lunch break, standing outside the coffee shop in the December chill. The Portland sky was its usual gray, but somehow it felt different today. Not oppressive, but full of possibility. "Hi, sweetheart," Mom answered on the second ring. "How are you doing? I've been worried about you since you and Marcus broke up." "I'm okay, Mom. Actually, I'm calling because I have some news." "Good news, I hope? Please tell me you're not moving in with some random roommate to save money." I took a deep breath, watching my breath create small clouds in the cold air. "I got accepted into a photography program. It's a 6-month intensive course, and it starts in January." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, Mom spoke, her voice carefully controlled. "Photography program." "Yes, documentary photography. It's a respected program, and the instructors are working professionals who—" "Bianca, honey, can we talk about this in person? I think there are some things we need to discuss." An hour later, I found myself back in my childhood home, sitting across from my mother at the kitchen table where we'd shared countless meals and conversations. She'd made tea, arranging the cups on the table with the kind of careful precision that indicated she was trying to maintain control over a situation that felt chaotic to her. "I don't understand," she said, her hands wrapped around her mug like an anchor. "You had something good with Marcus. He was perfect for you. Stable, loving, ready to build a life together. And you threw that away for what? A hobby?" "It's not a hobby, Mom. It's something I'm passionate about. Something that makes me feel alive in a way that nothing else does. Passion doesn't pay bills, Bianca. Passion doesn't provide health insurance or retirement savings or a stable foundation for a family." I looked around the kitchen where I'd grown up, at the refrigerator covered with old photos and school achievements, at the window that looked out onto the backyard where I'd played as a child. This house represented everything my mother valued: security, stability, the American dream of upward mobility achieved through careful planning and practical choices. "What if I don't want the same things you want?" I asked quietly. "What do you mean?" "What if I don't want the house and the mortgage and the 5-year plan? What if I want something different?" Mom set down her teacup with a sharp clink. "Different like what? Living paycheck to paycheck? Struggling to make ends meet? Watching all your friends get married and buy houses while you're still trying to find yourself?" "Maybe," I said, surprising myself with my honesty. "Maybe I'd rather struggle doing something I love than be comfortable doing something that makes me feel dead inside." "That's naive, Bianca. You're 23 years old. You think you know what you want, but you don't understand what it's like to face real responsibilities, real consequences." "Then let me find out," I said, my voice rising. "Let me make my own mistakes and learn from them." Mom leaned back in her chair, studying my face with the kind of intense focus she usually reserved for potential buyers. "Is this about Marcus? Are you doing this to punish him somehow?" "No, Mom. This is about me. For once in my life, this is about what I want. Not what everyone else thinks I should want. And what you want is to be a photographer. What I want is to try. To see if I can make something meaningful with my life, even if it's not the life you planned for me." For the first time in the conversation, Mom looked genuinely hurt rather than just frustrated. "The life I planned for you? Bianca, everything I've done has been about wanting you to be happy and secure. I want you to have choices, to not worry about money the way I did when you were little." I felt a flash of guilt, remembering the years when Dad had been between jobs, and Mom had worked double shifts to keep us afloat. Her emphasis on stability came from a place of love and hard-won wisdom, not from a desire to control my life. "I know that," I said softly, "and I'm grateful for everything you've done for me. But Mom, I'm not you. What makes you feel secure might not be what makes me feel alive. Being alive doesn't matter if you can't afford to live," she shot back. "And being able to afford to live doesn't matter if you're not really living." We stared at each other across the kitchen table. Two women who loved each other but couldn't seem to bridge the gap between their different visions of a good life. I could see the worry in her eyes, the genuine fear that I was making a mistake that would cost me everything she'd worked to provide. "I need you to support me," I said finally. "I need to know that even if you don't understand my choices, you'll still love me." "Of course I love you," Mom said, tears beginning to form in her eyes. I see Marcus, and he's such a good man, and he loves you so much. And I see you throwing away something real and solid for something that might not work out. But what if it does work out? What if I'm actually good at this? What if I can make a living doing something I'm passionate about? And what if you can't? Then I'll figure out plan B. But I need to try plan A first." Mom was quiet for a long moment, wiping her eyes with a tissue. When she looked up at me, her expression was softer, more vulnerable than I'd seen in years. "I just want you to be happy, sweetheart. I want you to have a good life." "I know, and I want that too. But my version of a good life might look different from yours. What am I supposed to tell people when they ask about you and Marcus? Tell them the truth. That I'm following my dreams, and that you raised a daughter who's brave enough to take risks." Something shifted in Mom's expression, and for a moment, I saw a glimpse of the young woman she'd been before mortgage payments and practical concerns had shaped her worldview. "You are brave," she said quietly, "maybe braver than I ever was." Or maybe just more foolish, I said with a small smile. Maybe both. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of our conversation settling between us. I knew this wouldn't be the last time we'd have this discussion, and I knew it would take time for Mom to fully accept my choices, but something had shifted in our relationship. Some acknowledgement that I was an adult capable of making my own decisions, even if they weren't the decisions she would make. The program starts in January, I said. I'll need to cut back my hours at the coffee shop. And I'll probably need to move to a smaller apartment to afford the tuition. How much smaller? Studio apartment. Maybe a room in a shared house. Mom winced, but she didn't argue. Will you still have time for family dinners? Of course, though they might be more sporadic for a while. And if things don't work out with the photography, you'll consider other options. I'll always consider other options, Mom. But I need to give this a real chance first. As I drove home that evening, I thought about the conversation and what it represented. I hadn't just told my mother about my plans. I'd claimed ownership of my own life in a way I never had before. The words, "she's just support," that I'd overheard at that family dinner had been about me being Marcus's support system, his emotional foundation. But I'd realized that I needed to be my own foundation first. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. I gave my notice at the coffee shop, found a tiny studio apartment in Southeast Portland, and began the process of paring down my possessions to fit into a much smaller space. Each decision felt like a small act of rebellion against the life I was supposed to want. Marcus texted me once during this period. A simple message. Heard from your mom about the photography program. I'm proud of you for following your dreams. I stared at the message for a long time before responding with a simple, thank you. Some relationships end with anger or bitterness, but ours was ending with respect and genuine care for each other's happiness. On New Year's Eve, I stood on the small balcony of my new apartment, looking out at the Portland skyline. The city stretched before me, full of stories waiting to be told, moments waiting to be captured. I thought about the girl who had sat at that family dinner just a few months ago, feeling trapped by everyone else's expectations and afraid to voice her own dreams. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. Happy New Year, sweetheart. I love you, and I'm proud of you for being brave enough to chase your dreams, even if they scare me. I smiled, typing back. I love you too, Mom. Thank you for raising me to be brave. Classes would start in a week, and I had no idea what the future would hold. I might fail spectacularly. I might discover that I wasn't as talented as I hoped. I might end up back at the coffee shop, humble and broke, having learned that practical dreams exist for practical reasons, but I also might discover something amazing about myself and the world around me. I might find a way to make a living doing something I loved. I might create work that mattered, that changed how people saw the world. For the first time in my life, I was okay with not knowing which outcome awaited me. I was okay with the uncertainty, with the risk, with the possibility of failure. Because I'd finally learned the difference between being someone's support system and being my own foundation. As the fireworks began to explode over the Portland skyline, I raised my camera and started taking pictures. Each click of the shutter felt like a small declaration of independence, a quiet assertion that this was my life to live, my story to tell, my dreams to chase. The girl who had been just support was gone. In her place stood a woman ready to support herself, to build her own dreams, to create her own definition of a life well lived. And that felt like the most important photograph I'd ever taken.